Welcome to the program tonight. I am Augusto Perez. My guest tonight is Gill Brousard, amateur astronomer and researcher, and we will be talking about Planet X. So tonight I want to welcome to the show Gill Brousard. Welcome.
Thank you, Augusta.
What brought you into this interest to bring you where you are today?
A friend of mine called me and he asked me if Planet X was real and if it was biblical. And at the time, I told him that Planet X was not real and that I'm pretty sure there wasn't any astronomical evidence for such a planet. And so after the conversation, I said, if I'm ever asked that again, I need to get the actual data together to be able to answer that properly. So I started to do a search. I came across my own data in the Chinese records, and that kind of really started it all off. Actually found a white paper, a scientific white paper report called the Reevaluation of the Eastern and Western Records of the Supernova of 1054. And what that did was it proved that our assumptions that it was the supernova, that it ended up proving it wrong, that this object was actually moving through the night skies, as documented by the Chinese and the Korean and the Japanese astronomers. So when I read the article, I decided to attempt to plot its orbit because the data was they had done such a good job in stating where the object was, the brightness, the time, the year, the day, all of the criteria that we need to try to have a plot of this orbit. And they had multiple sightings of it within a 26-month period. And so out of that, what astounded me was the plot of its orbit ended up matching the biblical parameters, where like in Noah's flood, it says it's 150 days between the time that it started raining to the time the flood started to recede. And that's equal to the same time frame as in Revelation, where it says from CO6 to CO7 that they wish death for 5 months, but death will not come. Well, 5 months is equivalent to 150 days. And this object is plotted coming into the month of Passover and exiting, it comes in the end of August. It goes around the sun, and then it exits during the month of Passover. That was quite astounding and shocking whenever you find actual white paper reports that match a biblical event or an object that's occurring in the same way as the biblical accounts are. Well, you can take the story of Jonah.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever they asked Yeshua, when is this to be taking place, he said, the only sign that you will have would be a sign of Jonah. And there's only 2 pages to the story of Jonah. One was the 3 days in a whale, which Yeshua also used that one pertaining to how long will he be in the grave? 3 days and 3 nights, as in Jonah. But for his return, he says the only sign for a wicked nation will be the sign of Jonah. And when you read the second half, most people don't get the emphasis. It's more on what's not being said. Jonah convinced an entire town and its king to repent, but he didn't perform not a single miracle. How is that possible? Because the models show us in 40 days, he said, your doom will come. The model shows us within 40 days, this planet is clearly in the view of Earth and is gaining in size as it's approaching Earth. That's what was, because they already, the people of Nineveh, recognized the signs of the earthquake, the birds dying, the fish dying, the same things that we're seeing today. They knew something was wrong. And when Jonah pointed to the sky and told them that this is your doom, that's why they believed. And for Jonah to know that, well, God gave him the information as far as the timing and when to do this. You can see the fingerprint of God throughout this on the timing. We happen to know approximately the size now. There's 3 ways of calculating the size according to the data that's given in the biblical accounts as well as some of the Chinese accounts. And it roughly calculates between about 6.5 to 7.5 diameters of Earth. So I kind of took the average and I said 7. So I called it Planet 7X. At the same time, it helps to separate the data. When someone says something, you know where somewhat where they're getting the information from, whether if it's the Samaritan text, Stitchen's work, or if it's someplace else on Earth, or if it's from the Chinese and the data that I've accumulated from the Bible. That makes the distinction in the conversation as far as where the data is coming from. I'm the first one to get actual scientific data from the Chinese or anywhere that's actually verifiable in a model. This is not hearsay. This is from a scientific report that's been through the peer review, and they list it as an NEO, a near-Earth object. When I plotted it, I found out that it was the biblical model, and this is going to be our Planet X. Now, if you go with 3,600-year orbit, people say this was Noah's flood. Well, you missed Noah's flood by over 700 years. So what event could have done if it's not Noah's flood? Two, the Chinese saw this in 1054. That's less than 1,000 years ago. So how can it be 3,600 years?
Yeah, that always presented a problem to me.
Exactly. Once you start ironing out the problems, it narrows down the data to a reality. And what does it match in the real world? What's common in reading ancient languages, anything over 1,000 years ago, zero did not exist. Zeros are implied in the text. That's left up to the interpreter to put as many zeros as he wish within reason on trying to estimate what they're trying to say. So Stitchen, when he read the clay tablets, what he literally read in the clay tablets was 6 times 6. Now, because of other data, they could tell the ancient Samaritans had a 60 unit of measure, 60. So he put the first number at 6, being 60. Then the next one, he said, well, on his memory alone, he's saying, well, it hasn't come through here before. So he dropped the number in there that it must be 60 times 60. Well, that gives you the 3,600-year orbit. But if you had left it at 60 times 6, he'd got 360-year orbit. It's through an assumption that it has not come through our solar system before, he went with 60 instead of 6. And that's how you get the 360, and that's been, everybody grabbed onto that. But there was no hard data because zeros did not exist. You have no information to plot its orbit. There's no documented, now what I'm talking about evidence, I'm talking about what day, time, and place on Earth that it was seen, what constellation it was saw, what radius, what direction of travel, what's the brightness of it, was it by any known stars, and what angle from that known star. The only one to give us that type of detailed information is the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean records. Their astronomy goes back just a few hundred years after Noah's flood. That's how far their astronomy goes. Are they motivated on doing the work correctly? It was documented that 2 astronomers were caught at their post sleeping, and it was reported to the emperor. The emperor cut their heads off because he wanted reliable data of all comets and all happenings in the sky, because it was, to them, it was a very real threat, because this comet changes the weather pattern. Well, this planet, when it gets close enough, it'll have a tail.
So it is like a planet comet, actually.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. It does not meet our present terms. This is going to be called a brand new object in a way. It does not meet the full definition of a planet, and it's too big for the known comets. So they'll have to come up with a whole new category. That's why there's plausible, deniability by the politician to be politically correct. You ask them, what about this planet? They'll say, what planet? There is no planet approaching. Well, then if you say what comet, they still say none. They changed the definition of a planet in, I think it was 208 or 206. Since then, unless you knew the new terms that they're going to use for it, you will not be able to corner them because it's politically not correct, as far as the terms used. But this object does not meet the definition of what they define as a planet today. Now, what's interesting on that, they have a problem because it says that one of the other cannot be a planet if it crosses another known planet's orbit. Well, this thing crosses Earth's path twice. Which one they going to disqualify, Earth or it, as a planet? This thing is 7 times our diameter. They always give an excuse if it's smaller than and it crosses, therefore it cannot be. But this one's bigger. They have a problem with their definition. They're going to have to change something. They have to add something for any astronomers out there, if they wish. If they were to get the white paper report, as I stated earlier, they can plot it also. They can plot the orbital path of this and verify anything that I'm saying. I put all of the information on my YouTube channel, the calculations, the representative models of each one of these incidents. There's an interesting saying there. Someone is saying is, how do you define science? A lot of people say the Bible doesn't meet scientific principle. That's not true anymore, or maybe never has. I'm just saying that it does now. The answer for what science is was defined in astrophysics. It says if you can take a paranormal phenomena into the laboratory and show that it's repeatable, there's a word for that. They call it science. Well, we have multiple eyewitness accounts that we can literally build models with now, and it proves out their comments that they experienced and witnessed. And that is impossible for the time period. They had no concept of Kepler's laws of planetary motion or the forces ruling the universe. For them to get this that accurate as they claimed in the Bible is impossible. They saw a real object that caused real events for the time period.
Could this be the same object that is referred to as Hercules? And
yes,
I believe there was a scientist named Ferrara from South America that he talked about it before anybody even heard about anything related to this object. And the interesting thing that I bring him up, and the reason I'm bringing him up is because he's the first one I ever heard call this object a planet comet.
He is the closest because he's using actual planetary physics. Mm-hmm. He's not using hearsay. He is trying to produce a model, but he was still lacking data to get his model accurate. His claim of this being a comet planet, absolutely right on. He's the first one to do it, and he's absolutely correct. This is what the data is proving.
Yeah, this is definitely something we have never seen before. The question probably that a lot of people are asking out there, okay, that are listening to us tonight, around that orbital, about 324 years, how come we haven't seen any destruction, let's say, in the last 400 years? We haven't heard of any destructions or any tidal waves of such, or any earth-shaking events that are recorded. How come we haven't seen that? So
well,
how would you
actually there is some events that are misrecorded. We just never labeled it to this coming through our solar system. See, if Earth, the only time it gets close to Earth, if Earth is in the position of the month of Passover, which is March or April, when it's made its round around the sun, and it's also in the month of March or April. That's when it comes close. That's when it's the most severe. And it's happened Earth has tilted in its orbit when it's passed, because it's like two magnets attracted to each other. The poles start to tilt. I have documented, I think, close to 4 times that Earth has tilted 26 to 28 degrees in its past.
Now, was this a gradual tilt? Gill, was this a gradual tilt or a sudden tilt?
There's no definite data. Through the models looking at it, we can do a rough approximation. It's between, the tilt would take anywhere from 3 to 5 hours coming in and another 3 to 5 hours going out. The tilt would reverse itself. Now, if you're 90 degrees from the axis of tilt, the wind's 90 degrees from that tilt, you're looking at approximately, you're covering almost 2,000 miles of Earth's surface within 26 to 28 degrees. So you're looking anywhere from 500-mile-an-hour winds to 300-mile-an-hour winds. The Arctic Circle would reach Washington, D.C. area. If 90 degrees to the tilt was the west coast of Greenland, from my last calculations, according to what Revelation is talking about, the pivot point is going to be around Jerusalem on its tilt. Therefore, 90 degrees from that tilt gives you the west coast of Greenland. And if it tilts 26, 28 degrees, you're looking at the Arctic Circle temporarily coming down as far as Washington, D.C. at 200 to 300 mile an hour winds, or maybe as high as 500. You're looking at things being flash frozen. Now, has that happened in the past? Yes. We found frozen mammoths with subtropical plants in their mouths, like daisies and such. This mammoth did not even have time to swallow, and he was flash frozen.
Yeah, I have read those events. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. There's been no explanation for it. Now we have one. We have the model that can prove this. Remember, what is science? You can bring a phenomenon into the laboratory and make a model, and that proves it out and it's repeatable. That's science. We have one. This object is what's been doing this. This is what caused us the mini ice age, because Earth tilt changes. In other words, if it tilts 26 to 28 degrees, well, when it comes back, the continents have shifted some. The continents can be shifted as much as 7 to 14 degrees, according to the past records. Well, if you're 14 degrees closer, guess what? You got a mini ice age. That means the temperature of Canada is now in the mid area of the U.S. and vice versa, and so on. It's changing. Our magnetic north is moving 30, 40 times its normal speed, moving towards a little bit to the west of the North Pole, looking from the U.S., okay? That's alarming. It's never did that. Well, we think it never did it, but when you go back and check the records, when I check where the magnetic fields have been in the past and their normal path where the magnetic north is, they've got it documented for almost 1,000 years, and I went back and I plotted the years that I believe that this planet X has passed. And then I drew a circle around the North Pole pertaining to that to give me an average. This next year, we're inside that circle, meaning a high probability that it's near, because that's where it's been in the past. When it gets close to that area, means this object is within a year or two of reaching it.
That's very interesting.
Changing the magnetic fields or changing our jet stream. Mm-hmm. When it changes the jet streams, you got your climate that's way off, and that's why. And another pointer that you can go throughout history is look for 7-year periods of drought. It's throughout the Bible and it's through history, these major parts of drought. Like during the Dark Ages, this object is what starts this thing to occur. And you see major earthquakes that are misrecorded when the thing passes by. Now, if we're in winter at the time that it's passing through March, only thing we get visually is something about when you look at the night sky at night, if you know your stars and your planets, you can pick out Jupiter and you can pick out Venus quite easily because they're the brightest objects in the sky. Jupiter is larger, but Venus is brighter. At the maximum distance from it, as it's rounding the sun, what it would appear to us would be about equal to the size of Jupiter in a visual respect, but it's brighter than Venus. Okay, so it had been just another bright object in the sky it probably have a tail. So the Chinese described it as having a tail. This is the same object that Constantine saw when it rounded the sun, and he said he saw a star in the sky. It was this object. The time frame
is the same object he saw. Wow, I had never heard anyone say that before, but that always stuck in the back of my head. What was it that Constantine saw? Because he definitely saw something.
Yes. Now, it was probably a few months prior to that battle that they got it labeled in. But that's the size of the object that they would have seen. Now, if you look at the time of Joshua and Joshua's battle, there's additional data that's found outside the Bible. It's in the Talmud. Not all the Talmud is correct, but it's not all wrong neither because it has historical documentation of things that happened, okay? And it states during Joshua's time that him and his men saw an object in the sky 50 times the diameter of the moon. Well, this is one of the times that we can calculate the size, okay? If you put this object that I'm saying that's 7 times the diameter of Earth, roughly halfway between the moon and Earth, you have a representation of 50 to 1.
That's pretty big.
From a viewpoint of Earth. This would also, if you back it up a few hours in its path, Now remember, the path of it is passing between the moon. Now the tail is not pointing in line with its path. The tail is pointing opposite of the sun. That's because it's the solar wind that's causing the tail. So now you have the tail pointed at Earth, when the path is taking it in front of Earth.
Right.
Can you picture that?
Sure.
Well, when that tail, when Earth is entering into the tail, the plasma field. Remember, this is clear. It's just a bright light, but Earth is going into the plasma field. Now that's stopping the natural energy from the sun going into our north and south pole, causing Earth to slow down in its rotation 4.5 to 5.5% per hour, compounded hourly. And guess what you have within about a little bit over 24 hours? You get the Earth to stop without mile-high tidal waves, just like the accounts of Joshua says. I took this model, I showed it to a physics professor. He took a few minutes to study it, and this is his quote. He says, I'm the first one to explain this phenomenon logically, because the model works. Earth can slow down. There's two camps of theory on what is ruling the universe. The astronomers say gravity is ruling the planets. The physicists say it's electromagnetic in nature. The story of Joshua proves out that the universe is ruled by electromagnetic, not gravity. Because if it had been gravity ruled, it would have grabbed us and carried us out into a further orbit, and we would have froze to death. End of story. There'd been no more stories to write. If we have electromagnetic, guess what they would do? They would attract like two magnets. That's exactly what happens.
Right.
In the stories. We've had 2 or 3 times that Earth is tilted. One time is during the time of Joseph. Remember the 7 years of plenty, 7 years of drought?
Mm-hmm. Right.
This object comes about midway of the drought. You have 3.5 years drought coming in, 3.5 years drought as it leaves. You may ask, how do I know that Earth tilted? From an artifact in Germany called the Nebra disk.
Yeah, can you explain that a bit, Gill?
The Nebra disk was an artifact that grave robbers, I call that, but they weren't robbing a human grave, but they were robbing the site, ancient artifacts. They found this, I think, a copper disc with gold leaf objects that represent the star patterns, as well as the moon and the sun, and the surrounding area, the horizons. And the copper is tarnished a nice green. And they were caught trying to sell this. I think it was in maybe Switzerland somewhere. And the authorities caught them, the Germans already caught, and the object was brought back, and now it's in a museum. Now, they had a few experts that tried to discern everything, and then I've read them, and I kind of disagree with some of their findings. Number one, they say the lower part of this disc is not the horizon in front. They make the claim that it's the Egyptian boat Styx that ferries the dead across the river. Well, I got a question. How did the Germans in mid of Europe ever go to Egypt to be able to get this information? And instead, when you go to Google, when you go to the site where the ancient Miss Observatory is, and look where they were looking at in the night sky, exactly in front of them is an old riverbed. They have a dam that closed off the riverbed. They had to reroute the river because of the dam, but if you put it where the old river is, that's exactly what was in front of the observer, which is at the base of the Nebra disk. Now, another thing that the experts missed was the moon, the illuminated side of the moon is facing the wrong direction. Illuminated side of the moon, that's the face towards the sun. So when they were looking at the moon, they said, well, with that shaped crescent, it was X amount of days old. Let's say the cycle of a moon is 29 and something days old. Well, they got that wrong, because now you got to reverse it 180 degrees. You know, it's either 3 days or it's 28 days, one of the two, somewhere. So they had the wrong time frame they're looking for. And so that throws off the timing on when to estimate the years on when this thing was made. They had estimated it was outside the Bronze Age, and they thought that was so phenomenal that it was outside the Bronze Age, but it was not, because they were dating it wrong. Once I corrected the errors in it, opened the software and started looking for a date, it matched the same date, Joseph of Egypt. That disk, on the bottom left corner, there's a constellation called Orion. In the month of Passover, which this frames the month because it has a constellation to the right and a constellation to the left there, Gemini to the left and Capricorn to the right. Well, when Mr. Orion is seen from the bottom, you cannot see the constellation of Mr. Orion from Germany during the time of March. Only way that you could do that is if the Earth tilted 26 to 28 degrees. The sun is shown there, but you can't see the stars with the sun. So the sun is shown as an eclipse. It's being darkened. The moon to the right tells you the moon was not involved with this eclipse. You can only have a new moon to eclipse the sun. If it's in a crescent shape, that means it's not a new moon, and it cannot be involved.
Is there any idea who built this disk that you're referring to?
The disk, they can pretty much say that it was from the Nebra colony, okay? And they had an ancient observatory there to where they could tell when the season started. So they were very in tune with the constellation and knowing when the year happened, when to plant the crops, when to harvest. That's why you have these ancient observatories. Because if you miss the planting season, your town could starve. It was very important at the time to better know when to plant and when to harvest. And that's what these things would help them with. So when they say it's coming from the south, you don't look from the South Pole. You look towards July at the nighttime skies of July, okay, which is around Sagittarius. This is the same area of space where they sent the Voyager and Pioneer probes in that constellation. What were they looking for? They stated in multiple articles they were looking for a new planet because the outer planets are perturbed by gravity that's telling them that there's another unfounded planet further out. And Pluto does not calculate to be the one doing the perturbing of the other planet. Its mass is too small. They sent 3 satellites towards that direction. And around in 92, their instruments were able to triangulate their instruments that read gravity. The gravity instruments told them direction, height, and, and area where it's at to where they could triangulate. After that, NASA went silent on the whole subject of Planet X, and that's when they found it. Now, I estimated it was around 8 years or so outside of our solar system at the time. When it reaches Pluto, it takes 20 years to reach the sun, according to the models. Kepler's law of the planetary motion at roughly 360-year orbit, it's going to take 20 years to reach the sun, and that's roughly around this next year. 16 and 17 is going to be a very interesting year. That's why you've seen all of this elevated earthquakes, weather patterns, animal life, death, you name it. It's multiple of items out there that you can name that are all elevated beyond its norm. We're in for some really phenomenal sights that are coming up. When this thing gets really close, when we start to go back through the tail again, you're going to see the aurora borealis go all the way down to the equator. And when that's super active, it hums like a trumpet when it's super active. You think there's trumpets going on.
Really?
And it's the aurora borealis going all the way down to the equator because the tail is plasma. And what is the aurora? The aurora is when you have like a solar flare and plasma hits the Earth. It causes the aurora. Okay? Well, we're going to have a huge amount of plasma hitting the magnetic field of Earth. And you'll see it excited, and it's going to go, you're going to see extreme amount of colors and sounds. You can go through all of the stories of the Bible, and I give a list of these. If you want to go through them, we can real quick. And where they can find these objects, these stories that's lining up with the events of this passing object that's coming through our system, because it's documented in the Bible more than any other document. The stories are not random in the Bible. The stories are giving us the details on what to expect actually for the end times to prepare us. And I didn't come to that realization till I processed all of the information. Noah's flood, we had touched on the subject that it was 150 days between the start of the flood and when the water started to recede. when a impact from a large meteorite hit the Earth, and 91% of our crust was knocked into space from the opposite side, it is, because crust at the time, and still is, crust is only held on by gravity because it's not glued on. That's why we have continental drift. Then the next one after that, the Tower of Babel. In the Talmud, again, gives us additional historical information on this event. It says that the top of the tower was burned, the lower part of the tower sank into the sand like liquefaction, just what we would expect. And the burning, I'm assuming that the burning was caused by a meteorite shower on the top. And it says only the center section is left for people to view. Well, if you go on Google Earth and look south of the ancient city of Baghdad, that's actually the Mid-Kingdom. If you look further south than that, that's where the Old Kingdom used to be during the time of this tower. And you see the outline of a square that is the base of the ancient ziggurat of Tower of Babel. And it has a moat around it, a water moat, because the base has sunken into the sand, leaving it as void to be filled up with water. So the data is checking out on this one. Then the next event after that was the time of Joseph of Egypt. 7 days of plenty, 7 days of drought. Remember Joseph's dream where he said that he saw the moon and he saw 12 stars bowing to him?
Right.
I took that as Leo being the sign of 11 with another planet there, giving it a 12. And he saw these things bowing to him. They moved. Okay, we always thought that was just a dream that never came per se true, that it only represented the actual descendants, his son, which it can be interpreted. But with the Niebuhr disk, I can prove that the skies did bow to him because Earth tilted. And when you're looking at the sky from the viewpoint of Earth, that's what it appears, that the moon and the stars bowed to him.
Wow, that's pretty interesting.
And this is actually the first place that the moon is mentioned in the Hebrew Torah, not in the English translations.
Right. Because
many of the English translations, they have moed mistranslated as moon. Moed means appointed time, not moon. So
wow.
This is the actual place where moon is actually listed in Genesis 37:9. It actually uses the word moon there in the Hebrew. Between the data of the Niebuhr disk and this, we can piece the actual date and the year and the event. And the date was 1794, April 6th. That's what the astronomy software can point us to.
You know, when you know these facts that you're sharing with us tonight, and then you read the Bible again, it just comes alive. You look at it from a totally different perspective.
Yes, it does. And during the same time, now Egypt's territory went all the way up to the southern area of what we call today Turkey. Okay, it followed the coastline through Israel all the way to the southern regions of Turkey, or Lebanon and Syria and all of that. That was their at that time, they ruled the markets in those areas. Job was around that area. He was, Damascus area, around the Golan Heights, because that's where his son settled, okay? If you read the story of Job, Job's trouble starts with a meteorite shower where his flock and his shepherds are destroyed, and the house that his children was in collapsed, killing all his children. This was caused by us going through the tail of the debris of this planet. This is the same year and the same time frame as Joseph. That's we can piece this together in the story. You see, what's interesting is you can look at how far Earth travels in 1 hour. Earth travels 8.4 Earth diameters in 1 hour in its orbital path. That's how fast Earth is moving. If you take the angle of March 26 on its approach to Earth's path of this orbit during that time, you come up with 52.5 degrees. Now, what's interesting, before I had an actual date for this next event, I was going with an average. I just took it in the middle of the month, and it gave me closer to 40 degrees, and that's how I came up with that it was roughly 7 times the diameter Earth. But with the date given in Revelation 12:1, gives us the actual date using astronomy. Guess what this calculates to now? 6.66 diameters of Earth. With the actual date that's given in Revelation 12:1. Now, after Job's trouble comes Joshua's long day. Joshua's long day was roughly 355 years later, somewhere around there, around 14 in the 1400s BC time. Well, if you read the story of what took place, the Earth slowed down to give him 12 hours longer daylight so he can finish off his enemy. God told him the previous day to go and conquer his enemy that's 10 times larger than him. He only had 30,000. The army was 300,000. And he said, don't worry, I will deliver him to you. He gets there in the morning. The army is frightened because the sun is delayed coming up. And he comes in charging, and they start to run. And he starts to slaughter them. Then a meteorite shower comes within the sight of his men and Joshua and annihilate more of the enemy than he did with a sword. Now, how accurate can a person be with a meteorite shower where you're in view of it and it's only your enemies that is being wiped out?
Smart rock.
And tell you ahead of time that this is going to happen. And he can tell you what's going to happen before it happens. He's the only one that's able to tell time, the future. And Earth traveled through the magnetosphere of this planet, and that's what caused the rotational delay of 4.5 to 5.5% per hour compounded hourly, and you get the Earth to stop, as it claims. The model proves this out. Talmud says the meteorite shower happened between 2 to 3 hours later. Well, I have a chart that shows how far Earth travels in 2 to 3 hours if this object passed roughly half the distance between the moon, and this exactly calculates correctly for the beginning and the start of a meteorite shower.
Now, could this also have caused what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah? Because we know that there was definitely a rock or some type of a huge explosion that just wiped out that whole area there, not just Sodom and Gomorrah, but also other cities that are mentioned in the Bible. Was this also a result of the passing nearby of this celestial object at that time?
Now, this is where the data gets a little sketchy. My personal opinion, I believe it to be true. But there's a little bit of a conflict between the age of Abraham and I'm finding out that if we go with the astronomical date, I believe that I can fit this in where Solomon and Mr. Gomorrah was at the same time as the Tower of Babel, but just in a different area. Tower of Babel was in Iraq. Solomon and Mr. Gomorrah was at the southern end of the Dead Sea, both being hit by meteorite showers at the same time. We know that Abraham left Babylon and traveled somewhere in Israel because he was fairly near Solomon and Mr. Gomorrah to be able to rescue Lot. Remember how Lot, and he was warned by the angel to go over the mountain, that it was not safe in the valley. And he told him not to look back. Okay, there was 2 cities, not one. There was 2 that were destroyed. So when they got to the point where they were over the mountain, the first city goes up. Lot's wife hears the explosion. So she turns around and goes around where she was protected and shielded from the rock. The rock was shielding her from the blast. She went around the rock, and at the same time, the second city was detonated, was going off. Any super large explosion like a meteorite, if you're close enough, you're vaporized, just like it would be an atomic explosion, but it wasn't an atomic explosion, but it's like an atomic. She was vaporized. Right. Now, if you take a look at what happened in Nagasaki, there's people's shadows that are still there today on the cement wall where they used to stay. because they were vaporized. This is what happened to Lot's wife. Her shadow was the only thing left. And the way that they wrote it, remember, it doesn't say God turned her to a pillar of salt. It's the observers that are writing on what they saw. She was turned to, because they could see the perfect outline of her.
Right.
She was turned to, because they had no explanation at the time. They didn't have a word like vaporization. They didn't even know what happened to her. They just saw the only thing left was a shadow, and that was probably her right there. Okay? That's how it's explained in the Bible, because you have to separate what God said happened and what the observer is witnessing. Well, let me give you some information that's hard numbers, okay? That's hard to, you can't dispute on where the object is at. It's going to be pointing, it's going to come out of the constellation Sagittarius, okay? We have, this is where the Voyager and Pioneer probes are. Look, there's 12 constellations on a planetary plane. Even if you would divide it in the vertical, another 12, what are the odds of it being the same constellation? Very high. Very high. So you got Voyager and Pioneer that went to that constellation. You got the biblical data that's pointing to that constellation. You got the Chinese data that's pointing to that constellation. You got the UL study that new gravity is affecting the orbits of comets in that exact region of space. Confirmed by a London astronomer that confirmed these same findings of comets that is affected in that same space. You got 5 studies that point to the same. We got hard data here. Not, look, you can take clay tablets, you can take papyrus scrolls, you can take any type of data. If you can bring it into a laboratory and reproduce it as a model, show that it's repeatable, that's science. I'm sorry, but the way they interpreted the Sumerian text cannot be produced a proper model that matches history. The 3,600-year orbit and coming out from some other does not match the repeated data throughout history.
Isaiah 24:23 says, "Then the moon shall be confounded, and the sun shall be ashamed." And then there's others where it says the moon shall be as the light of the sun. In other words, the moon is going to intensify in light. And in Isaiah 13:10, he talks about the moon shall not cause her light to shine.
Okay.
So obviously there's going to be a lot of impact on the moon as far as it's going to act weird. I guess that's what you're trying to ask, Larry, right?
That's it. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, let me give you the planetary physics version on this. Okay. You can only have a new moon create an eclipse of the sun, and that's when, if you look at a new moon, it's totally black in the sky. So if they're referring to both of these objects having an eclipse, it has to be a third object, because the moon has to be away from its new moon position, whether it's in full moon or a quarter of that or whatever. It has to be away from its new moon for you to even see a difference in the moon, for it to be eclipsed in reddish color, and for the sun to be eclipsed. So you're talking about a third object. This is the same thing that took place during Yeshua sacrifice. Remember the 3 hours of that they state that there was the eclipse for 3 hours?
Mm-hmm.
The sun and the moon went dark. Well, we have a problem here. Passover is on a full moon. Therefore, the moon cannot be involved with the solar eclipse. It's the opposite side of Earth. It has to be on the inside.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's right. And a moon can only give you 7.3 hours, 7.3 minutes of a solar eclipse, maximum. And it does not darken the whole Earth, as the text refers to. It only darkens a small path, and Earth rotates out of the shadow. That's why it can only last 7.3 minutes. So if you have an object, which I'm saying is 7 times the diameter of the Earth, or 6.5, somewhere in there, at a given distance, it will give you exactly 3 hours of darkness over the entire Earth, and also eclipse the moon at the same time. It is referring to a third object right here. This is the same object that Yeshua said, the sign of Jonah, when Jonah went to Nineveh and warned them.
Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. More sense now than once you know this detail. Well, we got about 12 minutes left, and I have a couple of questions that I'm going to ask, and I know a lot of people out there are asking the same question, and you have done a tremendous amount of research on this, Gill, and that is, how bad will this next pass be based on your research and what you have observed? And secondly, how close is this event?
Well, in short, I do not have a crystal ball. I cannot predict the future or even attempt in a way of saying unless I have data. And that data has to come from someone who can predict the future. Okay? Mm-hmm. So I looked for data. In Revelation, it says, Revelation 12:1. It says, the moon at the foot of a woman that with a crown of 12 stars. Well, if you say stars and you say moon, where are we looking at? Looking in the heavens and the stars. Mm-hmm. What woman is in it? Virgo. Okay? Mm-hmm. When I read that through astronomy eyes, I immediately spotted it as being Virgo with a crown of 12 stars. Leo is 11 stars. But Jupiter comes across that path, which is called the king planet. The same king planet which notified the Magi that the Messiah was born. Mm-hmm. It was over Regus, and that gave announced they had the king planet with the king star. Regus is about where the heart of Leo is, the lion. When you bring Jupiter back into play, that gives you 12 stars as a crown over Virgo, the moon at her feet, and the next it says it's closed with the sun. Now, Revelation is the only book that we do not have a Hebrew or Aramaic version to confirm our text that is being used. But throughout the rest of the Bible, it has proven out that often, not all the time, but often, the word in Hebrew was illuminated body, not sun. The Greeks, who are sun worshippers, would automatically put sun there because he's trying to fill in the blanks. Okay? That word does not represent sun. It represents an illuminated body. And how do we know this? 2, the repeat pattern is Passover. Okay? You can only see Passover in the nighttime skies.
Okay.
You have to be in September to see it in the daytime skies. The zodiac, which is, again, it's 180 degrees opposite of anything in the Bible, uses the daytime skies. We shouldn't be using that, for one. It's not the pattern set in the Bible. Daniel and them use the nighttime skies. And 2, you cannot see stars during the day. You have to use charts or software and use it as if you were reading a zodiac. Anyone can see the sign that I'm talking about. In nighttime, in the month of Passover, at night, Leo is smack dab in the center of the nighttime skies at midnight. If you switch this object, this illuminated body, this planet X coming through here, its tail, just like a comet, the tail is pointing opposite of the sun, and guess what? It goes right through Virgo, the tail, illuminating Virgo only, as the text refers. The sun illuminates all the constellations, not just one. But the tail of this object in the model only illuminates Virgo. Only an object on a planetary plane of Earth can illuminate Virgo.
Okay.
So this gives us the date that this object is going to cross Earth's path, and that's March 26th of 2016 is giving us a date. Now, from a model, I can put this in there, and using the 150-day separation, it tells me it enters at the end of August. It enters our inner solar system, rounds the sun, and exits out on March 26th, where we're about 2 hours behind it. For it to be in between the moon and the earth, that means it's passing, and about 2 hours later, we're entering the debris field of its tail, which is seal 6 in Revelation. The first meteorite shower is seal 6. The 150 days later is seal 7. Seal 7, now visually, the seal 6 is going to be more of an impact visually, with the tilting of the earth, the aurora borealis coming down to the equator, with the meteorite shower hitting 1/3 of the, burning 1/3 of the trees, 1/3 of the grass, and later it says 1/3 of the rivers. It is describing continental crust. And we know that only half of the earth is hit from meteorites coming from the sunny side. So what half of the earth is 1/3 of the continental crust? North and South America. Exactly. Asia and Europe is 2/3 of the continental crust. The Bible is telling us what half of the earth is going to be hit by meteorite after a 12-hour delay in its rotation. The delay is the false miracle that the Antichrist is going to perform in front of people that even the elite of his followers will be in doubt, because he will predict a 12-hour rotation of earth, and that fire will fall on his enemies, which is North and South America. This Antichrist is going to be probably the Mahdi of Islam. For him to be recognized as the Mahdi of Islam, he has to be a world leader for 7 years prior to be identified as a Mahdi, and he has to have a sign in the heaven that proclaims him. This sign is this object. His false miracle is the rotation of the earth by 12 hours. In other words, scientists will predict that the meteorite shower will hit the Middle East and Europe. After a 12-hour delay in its rotation, it doesn't. It hits North and South America. And this is the false miracle that this Mahdi performs. Telling the Muslims that they're okay and safe because they can't leave their country because no one's going to grant them a visa. Because prior to that, in Seal 4, it talks about a war in the Middle East and terrorist activity and famine and disease. The Muslim, when Israel attacks Iran, you're going to have terrorist activity in all Western countries going on because of the Muslims. So this is right here, when they ask for visas to leave the danger zone, everybody refuses them. So they feel trapped. Then the Mahdi comes in there and says, look, don't worry. I will change times and laws. I'll change the rotation of the earth by 12 hours, and I'll have it rain fire on our enemies.
So basically what you're saying, Gill, is that this individual, in order to be accepted as the Mahdi, has had to be in power already for 7 years somewhere in the world, correct?
According to the Islamic, remember, this guy has to fulfill Christianity, which is the Antichrist form of it, that he has to form Judaism as a form of a prophet or some form, and he has to fulfill Islam. For him to be able to fool the world, he has to do all of this. Islam says he has to be a world leader for 7 years prior to even showing up and claiming to be anything, and he has to bring peace to the Middle East. That's his first accomplishment after that.
Through a peace
then
treaty,
from there,
through a peace treaty, which is all through the Bible.
That's Seal 5. If you read Seal 5, where the souls from underneath the altar are complaining to the Father, why have you not revenged us? And he says, go back to sleep. It's not your time. And the reason why it used to bother me, why are the souls complaining to God? It's because they see on earth a peace agreement being signed, and they have not been revenged yet. It's the peace agreement that woke them up. Where's our pound of flesh. When are you going to revenge us? He says, go back to sleep. It's not your time.
So, needless to say, we are in for some pretty turbulent times in this next several months and years.